The bullet had torn through Grace Ashford's shoulder 3 days before she saw another living soul on the Montana Trail. And by the time the cowboy's boots appeared in her fading vision, she had already made peace with dying alone under the merciless August sun of 1877. She had been trying to reach her aunt's homestead near Virginia City when the road agents ambushed her small wagon, taking everything of value except her life, though they had tried for that too. The lead ball lodged near her collarbone had turned the world into a fever dream of pain and delirium. Grace had managed to crawl beneath an overhang of rock beside the trail, her horse long since fled, her supplies scattered or stolen. The wound had festered in the heat, and she drifted between consciousness and darkness, sometimes unsure which was which. When the shadow fell across her face, she thought at first it was death finally coming to claim her, but death wore scuffed leather boots and smelled of horse sweat and wood smoke. "Madam," the voice was rough, strained with its own kind of pain. "Madam, can you hear me?" Grace forced her eyes open, squinting against the bright sky. The man above her swayed slightly, and she realized with the strange clarity of fever that he was hurt too. Blood darkened his shirt along his left side, spreading in a slow stain that spoke of a wound not quite stanched. His face was weathered and lean, shadowed by several days of stubble, but his eyes held a desperate kind of concern. "I am going to die here," Grace whispered, her throat raw from thirst and screaming. "Not if I can help it," the cowboy said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. "And maybe you can keep me from the same fate. My name is Marcus Zimmerman. Can you tell me yours, Grace Ashford?" The words cost her dearly, pulling at the fire in her shoulder. Marcus lowered himself carefully to his knees beside her, one hand pressed to his side. Up close, she could see the lines of pain etched around his mouth, the paleness beneath his sun-bronzed skin. "I took a knife in a fight 2 days back. Managed to stop the bleeding mostly, but I am not doing well. My horse threw me this morning when I blacked out in the saddle. Found him again, but I know I need to stop, to rest and treat this properly before infection takes me." "Then we are both dead," Grace said, and meant it, "or both alive." Marcus looked around, assessing their situation with a practiced eye despite his obvious pain. "There is a creek about a quarter-mile back, down in that draw. I have my horse, my supplies, and enough sense to make a proper camp. You have a will to live, I hope, and maybe some knowledge of tending wounds." "My mother was a nurse during the war," Grace said. The memory felt distant, like something from another life. "She taught me some. Then we help each other." Marcus said it like a vow, like a prayer. "Can you ride if I get you on my horse?" The very thought of moving sent waves of agony through Grace's body, but she saw the determination in this stranger's eyes, and found it reflected something she had thought lost in the days of suffering. "I can try." Getting Grace onto Marcus's bay gelding was an ordeal that left them both trembling and gray-faced. Marcus had to stop twice to vomit from the pain of moving his injured side, and Grace nearly fainted when he lifted her. But somehow, through pure stubborn will, they managed it. Marcus climbed up behind her, one arm wrapped carefully around her waist to hold her steady, and turned the horse toward the creek he had mentioned. The ride down to the water felt eternal. Grace drifted against Marcus's chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady behind her, feeling the tension in his body as he fought to stay conscious. When they finally reached the creek, a small clear stream running between cottonwood trees, Marcus half fell from the saddle, barely catching himself. He reached up to ease Grace down, and together they collapsed in the shade. For long minutes, neither of them moved, simply breathing, simply surviving. The sound of water over stones was the sweetest music Grace had ever heard. "We need fire," Marcus finally said, his voice rough. Need to heat water, clean these wounds properly. You are bleeding again, Grace observed, seeing fresh red seeping through his fingers where he pressed his side. So are you, Marcus replied, nodding toward her shoulder where blood had soaked through the crude bandage she had managed days ago. They looked at each other, two strangers brought together by violence and chance, both hovering at the edge of death, and something passed between them, some wordless acknowledgement of their desperate partnership. Fire first, Grace said, trying to push herself up. The world spun violently and Marcus caught her arm. I will handle the fire. You stay put and do not die on me. Same to you, Cowboy. A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips, the first hint of humor in his pain-drawn face. Deal. Marcus moved like a man underwater, slow and deliberate, each motion carefully calculated to avoid jarring his wound. Grace watched him gather deadwood from beneath the cottonwoods, watched him build a small fire ring with stones from the creek bed. His hands shook as he struck flint to steel, but he persisted until flames caught in the tinder. The sight of that fire, proof of human survival and will, brought tears to Grace's eyes. Once water was heating in Marcus's battered coffee pot, he knelt beside Grace. Let me see your shoulder. Grace nodded, unable to find words. Marcus's hands were gentle as he eased aside the fabric of her torn dress, revealing the angry wound beneath. His face went carefully neutral, but she saw the worry in his eyes. The ball is still in there, he said quietly. It needs to come out or you will not make it. I know. Grace had known for days, had felt the foreign metal grinding against bone with every movement. I tried to reach it, but I could not manage alone. I can do it, Marcus said, but his hands trembled visibly now and fresh blood bloomed across his shirt. I have done field surgery before during trail drives. But Grace, I need to be honest. I am not certain I can stay conscious through it. This knife wound is worse than I have been admitting. Grace looked at this man who was risking his remaining strength to save her, this stranger who could have ridden past her dying form and preserved himself. She reached out with her good hand and touched his wrist. Then, tend yourself first. What good does it do if you collapse halfway through working on me? I cannot reach the worst of my own wound, Marcus admitted, his voice rough with frustration and pain. It wraps around my side toward my back. I stitched what I could, but there is a section I cannot see or reach properly. Then let me, Grace said, before we are both too weak to help anyone. So began their desperate dance of mutual survival. Grace, fighting through waves of dizziness and pain, used Marcus's whiskey to clean her hands while he stripped off his shirt. The knife wound was vicious, a long gash that curved from his lower ribs around toward his spine. He had managed rough stitches along the front portion, but the back section gaped open, red and seeping. Dear God, Grace breathed. You rode 2 days like this. Had no choice. The men who did it took my trail partner's life. I had to get away before they finished me too. Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless, but Grace heard the grief underneath. She did not ask more questions. Using Marcus's supplies and the hot water, she cleaned the wound as thoroughly as she could manage with one functional arm. Marcus bore it in silence, only his white-knuckled grip on a piece of wood betraying his agony. When it came time to stitch, Grace had to stop 3 times to breathe through her own pain, but she completed the work. Her mother had been right about one thing. Training became instinct when necessity demanded. Your turn, Marcus said when it was done, his voice thin but determined. He had her drink deeply from his whiskey flask before beginning, and Grace was grateful for it when he made the first cut to enlarge the wound opening. The next hour existed in a blur of searing agony. Marcus worked with steady hands despite his weakness, speaking to her in a low, constant murmur, telling her about his ranch in Montana, about the cattle he raised, about anything to keep her conscious and focused. When the bullet finally came free with a wet sound that made Grace's stomach turn, she wept with relief. "Got it," Marcus said, holding up the misshapen lead ball. "You are one tough woman, Grace Ashford." Then he swayed, his eyes rolling back, and collapsed sideways onto the grass. "Marcus." Grace lunged for him, screaming at the pain in her freshly treated shoulder but managing to catch him enough to ease his fall. He was unconscious but breathing, his pulse rapid but present. She maneuvered him onto his back, checked his stitches, found them holding. Exhaustion crashed over Grace like a physical weight, but she could not rest yet. She forced herself to finish bandaging her own shoulder using Marcus's supplies and her teeth to tie the knots. She got more water heating, got Marcus's bedroll spread beside the fire, and with monumental effort managed to drag him onto it. She covered him with a blanket, checked his breathing again, and then finally allowed herself to collapse beside him. They lay there by the creek as the sun moved across the sky and shadows lengthened. Two wounded strangers in a cowboy camp that smelled of blood and smoke and survival. When Grace woke, night had fallen and stars blazed overhead in impossible profusion. The fire had burned low, and she forced herself to add wood, her shoulders screaming protest at every movement. Beside her, Marcus stirred, his eyes opening to find her face in the firelight. "We lived," he said, sounding surprised. "Through the day, at least," Grace replied. "Then we will take it one day at a time." Marcus tried to sit up, managed it with obvious effort. "How is your shoulder?" "On fire." "How is your side?" "Same." He looked at her, really looked at her in the dancing light. "Thank you for finishing what I could not reach. Thank you for not leaving me to die on that trail." They sat together in the warm August night, the creek singing its endless song, and Grace thought that she had never been more aware of being alive. Every breath hurt, but it was breath. Every heartbeat was pain and promise. "Tell me about these men who hurt you," Marcus said after a while. "Tell me what happened." So Grace told him about leaving St. Louis after her parents died of fever, about the aunt in Virginia City, who was her only remaining family, about the 3 road agents who had stopped her wagon on a lonely stretch of trail 4 days ago. She told him about fighting back, about the bullet that tore through her shoulder, about them leaving her for dead after taking her money and supplies. "I am sorry," Marcus said when she finished, and the sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Grace's chest. "You deserved none of that." "Tell me about your trail partner," Grace said gently. "Tell me about what happened to you." Marcus stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "His name was Samuel. We worked cattle together for 5 years, were partners in the ranch. We were driving a small herd to sell in Helena when we stopped at a trading post for supplies. Some men there were drunk, looking for trouble. Samuel always had a quick temper, and when one of them said something crude about the woman running the post, he took offense." Marcus's voice went rough. "It escalated. There was a fight. One of them pulled a knife, and when I stepped between them, I took this cut. Samuel pulled his gun, but he was not fast enough. They shot him dead right there." "I am so sorry," Grace whispered. "I got out while they were distracted, managed to get to my horse and ride. But I left Samuel there, left him lying in the dirt of that trading post, and that is something I will have to carry." Marcus looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He had a wife, a little girl 3 years old. "I have to get home to tell them, to get his share of the ranch money to them. That is what was keeping me moving, kept me in the saddle even when I thought I would die." Grace reached out and took his hand, simply held it in the firelight. Marcus's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong despite everything. "We will get you home," she said. "Both of us. We will survive this, and you will keep your promise to Samuel's family. And I will get you to Virginia City to your aunt, Marcus replied. That is my promise to you. They sat like that, hands linked, until exhaustion pulled them both back towards sleep. Before Grace let herself drift off, she added more wood to the fire and checked Marcus's bandages one more time. They were holding, no fresh blood seeping through. Grace. Marcus's voice was drowsy, slurred with approaching sleep. Yes. I am glad it was you I found on that trail, glad we found each other. Grace felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that had nothing to do with fever. So am I, Marcus Zimmerman, so am I. The days that followed developed their own rhythm, a slow dance of healing and survival in their small camp by the creek. They both ran fevers, their bodies fighting infection and trauma, and took turns being the strong one, the one who kept the fire going and heated water, and forced the other to drink broth made from Marcus's jerky and wild onions Grace spotted near the water. On the third day, Marcus managed to shoot a rabbit, and the fresh meat did them both good. Grace cooked it carefully over the fire, and they ate slowly, savoring every bite. You are a decent cook, Marcus observed, licking his fingers. My mother insisted all her children learn useful skills, Grace replied. Much to my father's amusement, he thought ladies should only know needlework and piano. Can you play piano? Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Terribly. But I can shoot straight, clean a wound, birth a foal, and balance accounts. My mother said those skills would serve me better than scales and sonatas. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Grace felt the familiar ache of loss. They both were good people. I miss them every day. Marcus nodded, understanding. I lost my parents when I was 17, ranch accident. That is when Samuel and I became partners. We built the place up from almost nothing. He poked at the fire with a stick, his expression distant. Now it is just me. Tell me about the ranch, Grace said, wanting to chase the sadness from his eyes. What is it like? So Marcus talked about his land in Montana, about the valley where his ranch sat nestled between mountains, about the cattle with their white faces and sturdy builds, about the horses he raised on the side. His voice grew animated as he described sunrise over the peaks, the sound of wind through the pines, the perfect coldness of the stream that ran through his property. It sounds beautiful, Grace said softly. It is. It is home. Marcus looked at her. What about you? What are you hoping to find in Virginia City? Grace considered the question. Honestly, I am not sure anymore. My aunt wrote that I could live with her, help her run her boarding house. It seemed like the only option after my parents died and the debts were settled, but I do not know her well. She and my mother were not close. Do you want to run a boarding house? I had not thought much about what I wanted, Grace admitted. I have been so focused on surviving, on getting there, on having any plan at all. My parents' deaths came so suddenly, and then selling the house, settling everything, it was all just motion without thought. Well, you have time now, Marcus said gently. Nowhere to be but here while we heal. And that was true. Their camp became a small world unto itself, bounded by the cottonwoods and the creek, measured by the movement of sun and stars. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, hopes, fears. Marcus told her about growing up on his father's small farm in Ohio, about heading west at 15 with nothing but determination and a borrowed horse. Grace told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her 2 brothers who had died young of scarlet fever, about her mother's quiet strength and her father's bookshop that never quite made enough money. They learned each other's hurts too, the wounds that went deeper than bullet and blade. Marcus spoke haltingly about the loneliness of the ranch, about how Samuel's death had shown him how isolated he had become, how few connections he had allowed himself. Grace confessed her fear that she had no real place in the world now, no home, no purpose beyond mere existence. "You are here," Marcus said one evening as they sat watching the sun set through the cottonwood leaves. "Right now, in this moment, you have purpose. You kept me alive when I would have bled out alone. That matters, Grace. You did the same for me," she pointed out. "Then we matter to each other," Marcus said, and the simplicity of it, the truth of it, made Grace's throat tight with emotion. By the 5th day, they were both strong enough to bathe properly. Marcus went upstream while Grace used the creek near camp, the cold water shocking against her fevered skin. She managed to wash her hair one-handed, to scrub away days of sweat and blood and fear. When she emerged, feeling more human than she had since the attack, Marcus had returned with wildflowers, yellow and purple blooms he had found in a meadow beyond the trees. "Thought the camp could use some brightening," he said, almost shy as he handed them to her. Grace took the flowers, touched beyond words. "They are beautiful. Thank you, Marcus." She arranged them in Marcus's extra tin cup, setting them beside the fire where they could both see them. Such a small gesture, but it felt enormous. Felt like proof that they were more than just wounded animals hiding in the wilderness, that they were people capable of seeing beauty, of creating it even in desperate circumstances. That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the fire, Grace found herself watching Marcus's sleeping face in the flickering light. He looked younger in sleep, the lines of pain and responsibility smoothed away. She thought about the man he was proving to be, capable and kind, strong but gentle, haunted but not broken. She thought about his hands, careful on her wounds, about his voice, steady in her darkest moments. Something was growing between them, something that went beyond gratitude or shared survival. Grace had felt the first stirrings of it days ago and had been trying to ignore it, trying to focus only on healing, on living. But lying there under the stars with the creek singing and Marcus's steady breathing across the fire, she could not deny it anymore. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her. They had known each other less than a week. They were both still recovering from trauma and injury. Nothing about this situation was conducive to romance or rational decision-making. But Grace's heart did not care about rational. It knew what it knew. She did not sleep for a long time that night, watching Marcus and wondering if he felt anything similar, wondering what would happen when they were both healed enough to leave this place, to continue to their separate destinations and separate lives. The next morning, Marcus was quieter than usual, thoughtful. He checked Grace's shoulder, pleased with how well it was healing, and let her examine his side, which was finally starting to close properly without fresh seepage. They were both on the mend, truly on the mend, and that knowledge brought both relief and a strange kind of sorrow. "We should probably think about moving on soon," Marcus said as they ate breakfast, his voice carefully neutral. "Another few days and we will both be strong enough to travel, at least short distances." "Yes," Grace agreed, though her stomach knotted at the thought. "I suppose we should. Virginia City is about 2 weeks' ride from here, maybe a bit less. My ranch is 3 weeks in the opposite direction." Marcus poked at the fire, not meeting her eyes. "We will need to figure out the best route for you. My horse can carry us both for a while, but eventually we will need to get you your own mount." "Marcus." Grace waited until he looked at her. "What are we doing here?" He understood what she was really asking. She could see it in his eyes. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I know what I should do. I should take you to the nearest town, make sure you are safe and provided for, then continue home to take care of Samuel's affairs." "That is the right thing, the sensible thing." "But," Grace prompted gently. "But I find myself not wanting to," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. I find myself wanting to stay here in this camp forever with you, where the rest of the world does not exist. And I know that is selfish and impractical and probably a result of shared trauma and fever, but it is true nonetheless. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. It is not just you feeling it. Marcus's eyes snapped to hers, searching, hopeful. Grace. I do not want to say goodbye to you, Grace said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know it is mad. I know we barely know each other. I know we are both dealing with terrible things, and that probably colors everything. But Marcus, when I think about riding away from you, about never seeing you again, it feels wrong. It feels like losing something precious before I even got to fully understand what it was. Marcus crossed the space between them in 2 strides, kneeling beside her, taking her hands in his. Then do not say goodbye, not yet, not until we are absolutely certain we have to. What are you suggesting? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Come with me, Marcus said. To Montana, to the ranch, meet Samuel's wife, help me settle his affairs. Stay for a while, give us time to figure out if this is real or just 2 broken people clinging to each other in a storm. And if it is real, Grace's heart was in her throat. Then we build something together, Marcus said simply. A life, a home, a future. But if it is not, if you get there and realize this was just gratitude or fear or anything other than true feeling, then I will take you to Virginia City myself. Make sure you get to your aunt safely, and we will part as friends. Grace looked at this man who had saved her life, who had let her save his, who had become the center of her world in the space of a few desperate days. She thought about the ranch he described, about the mountains and streams and sky. She thought about the alternative, a boarding house in Virginia City, an aunt she barely knew, a life of service to strangers. Yes, she said. Yes, I will come with you. The smile that broke across Marcus's face was like sunrise, brilliant and warm and full of promise. He cupped her face in his hands, careful of her healing shoulder, and pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy in a creek bed camp. Thank you for taking a chance on a half-dead woman bleeding on the trail, Grace replied, laughing through sudden tears. They did not kiss, not then. Both of them were still too aware of their wounds, their fragility, the tenuousness of their recovery. But they sat together, foreheads touching, hands clasped, and let themselves imagine a future that extended beyond the next day's survival. They stayed at the camp for 3 more days, building their strength and making preparations for travel. Marcus walked to where his horse had thrown him and recovered his saddle and other scattered supplies. Grace practiced walking longer distances, testing her shoulders' range of motion. They planned their route carefully, identifying towns where they could resupply and rest. On their last night by the creek, they packed everything except what they would need for the morning. The camp that had been their sanctuary looked strange, half dismantled, already becoming just another spot in the wilderness rather than their small world. I will miss this place, Grace said, sitting beside the fire one last time. Me too, Marcus agreed. This is where we found each other, where we became we instead of just I. Grace looked at him, at this man who had become so important so quickly. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. When did you know? When did you realize you felt something more than just partnership in survival? Marcus considered the question, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. The first morning I woke up and saw you tending the fire even though you were in pain. You could have stayed down, could have woken me to handle it, but you took care of it yourself, took care of us. And I remember thinking that you were the strongest person I had ever met, and I wanted to know everything about you. He smiled softly. What about you, the flowers? Grace said. When you brought me wildflowers for no reason except to make our camp more beautiful. It was such a gentle thing, Such a hopeful thing. It told me you were not just surviving but living, finding beauty even in hardship. And I thought, that is a man I could build a life with. Can I kiss you? Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. I have been wanting to for days, but I wanted to ask. Yes, Grace breathed. Please, yes. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but Grace did not want to. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Marcus's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, and Grace let herself sink into the kiss, into the warmth and connection and rightness of it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers again. Grace Ashford, you are extraordinary. So are you, Marcus Zimmerman, Grace replied. So are you. They slept side by side that night, Grace tucked carefully against Marcus's good side, his arm around her shoulders. It was the best sleep either of them had had since their injuries, wrapped in warmth and connection and the promise of tomorrow. Morning came bright and clear, the August sun already warm at dawn. They broke camp methodically, erasing most signs of their presence, leaving only the fire ring and trampled grass to show that two people had lived and healed here. Marcus lifted Grace onto his horse, then swung up behind her, gathering the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Grace looked back one last time at the cottonwoods and the creek, at the place that had saved their lives and changed everything. "Ready," she said. "Let us go home, Marcus." The ride north toward Montana was slow going. They traveled only a few hours each day at first, both of them still healing, still building back their strength. Marcus kept Grace settled in front of him, his arm around her waist, and she let herself lean back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body. They talked as they rode, continuing the conversations that had started in the camp. Marcus told her more about the ranch, about the cabin Samuel had built for his wife, about the main house that was really just 2 rooms and a loft, but had good bones and could be expanded. Grace told him about her skills with numbers, her experience helping her father with his bookshop accounts, and Marcus's eyes lit up. "I hate the paperwork side of ranching," he admitted. "Always have. Samuel used to handle most of it. Having someone who actually understands numbers and organization would be a blessing." "I could help with that," Grace said, feeling a flutter of excitement at the thought of being useful, of having a real role rather than just being a dependent. "You could help with a lot of things," Marcus said. "If you want to. But Grace, I want to be clear, if you come to the ranch, it is not as a servant or employee. It is as my partner in this whole endeavor we are undertaking." "Partner," Grace tested the word, liked how it felt. "Yes, I would like that." They reached a small settlement called Bannack after 3 days of riding. It was a rough mining town, past its boom years but still hanging on, with a general store and a saloon and a church. Marcus used some of his remaining money to buy supplies and to secure them a room at the town's single boarding house. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Henley, looked them over with sharp eyes. "You two married?" "Not yet," Marcus said smoothly, and Grace felt her heart skip. "But soon. My fiancé was injured by road agents. We have been recovering and are heading home to Montana." Mrs. Henley's expression softened. "Terrible business, those outlaws. You are welcome here, but I run a respectable establishment, separate rooms." "Of course," Marcus agreed. So Grace found herself in a real bed for the first time in 2 weeks, with clean sheets and a pillow and a door that locked. It was luxury beyond description, yet she found herself lying awake, missing the sound of the creek, missing Marcus's warmth beside her. A soft knock came at her door near midnight. Grace opened it to find Marcus there, looking uncertain. "I could not sleep," he admitted, Kept worrying about you, wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am fine," Grace said, "but I could not sleep either. Come in just for a few minutes." Marcus slipped into the room and they sat together on the edge of the bed, hands clasped. "This feels strange," Grace said, "being apart from you after so many days of constant company." "I know," Marcus agreed. "I feel like part of me is missing." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Grace, when I told Mrs. Henley we were engaged, it was just to make things proper, but the moment I said it, I realized I wanted it to be true." Grace's breath caught. "Marcus, are you asking me what I think you are asking?" "I know it is fast," Marcus said, his words coming in a rush. "I know we should wait, should be sensible. But Grace, I am 31 years old. I know my own mind. I know what I want, and I want to build a life with you. Not as a trial, not as a maybe, but as a commitment. So yes, I am asking." He slid off the bed onto one knee, still holding her hand. "Grace Ashford, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my home?" Grace looked at this man who had ridden into her dying moments and pulled her back to life, who had trusted her with his pain, who had shown her kindness and strength and gentleness. She thought about the life he was offering, about the ranch in the mountains, about building something together. She thought about her heart, which had already made its choice. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Marcus, I will marry you." Marcus surged up and kissed her, deeper this time, more passionate, and Grace wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus was grinning like a fool. "I do not have a ring," he said. "I will get you one, I promise, as soon as we reach somewhere with a jeweler." "I do not need a ring," Grace said. "I just need you." But they did find a ring the next day, in the general store of all places. It was a simple gold band, slightly tarnished, but when Marcus slipped it onto Grace's finger, it fit perfectly. The store owner, an old prospector named Dutch, told them it had been payment for a debt, that he had held onto it for years waiting for the right buyer. "It has been waiting for you," he told Grace with a wink. They stayed in Bannack for 3 more days, letting their injuries continue to heal and regaining strength. On Sunday, they attended the small church, and afterward, Grace spoke with the minister, a young man fresh from divinity school back east. "Could you marry us?" she asked. "Before we continue our journey," the minister, whose name was Reverend Taylor, looked uncertain. "I would need to post banns, wait the appropriate time." "Reverend," Marcus said quietly, "we were both nearly killed. We found each other in the worst moment and helped each other survive. Neither of us wants to wait to begin our life together, and neither of us wants to begin it living in sin. Please, we are asking you to bind us together in the eyes of God before we go home." Something in Marcus's words must have moved the young reverend, because he agreed. The next day, with Mrs. Henley and Dutch as witnesses, Marcus Zimmerman and Grace Ashford were married in the small church, speaking their vows in voices that rang with certainty. "I, Marcus, take you, Grace, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death parts us. I, Grace, take you, Marcus, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death parts us." When Reverend Taylor pronounced them husband and wife, and told Marcus he could kiss his bride, the kiss was witnessed by afternoon light streaming through the church's single window, painting everything in gold. Mrs. Henley insisted on hosting a wedding supper that evening, producing a chicken she roasted with potatoes and carrots. Dutch contributed a bottle of good whiskey he had been saving, and Reverend Taylor said grace over the meal. It was small and simple, but it was perfect, and when Marcus and Grace returned to their room at the boarding house that night, they were husband and wife. "Grace Zimmerman," Marcus said, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Grace replied. And then words became unnecessary as they came together with the tenderness and passion of two people who had earned every moment of joy, who knew how precious life and love could be. The next morning they set out again, riding north toward Montana and home. The journey took another week and a half, through country that grew progressively more beautiful, mountains rising around them, valleys spreading green and gold. Grace fell in love with the land as she had fallen in love with Marcus, completely, inevitably, without reservation. When they finally rode into the valley where Marcus's ranch sat, Grace understood why he had spoken of it with such longing. The mountains rose on three sides, their peaks still touched with snow even in late summer. The valley floor was lush with grass, dotted with grazing cattle, and a stream ran silver through it all. The cabin Marcus had described sat nestled against the slope with a small barn and corral nearby. "It is beautiful," Grace breathed. "It is home," Marcus said. "Our home now." But before they could truly settle in, there was the difficult duty of visiting Samuel's widow. Her cabin was visible from Marcus's, just a few hundred yards away, and Marcus had been growing quieter as they approached, the weight of his task pressing on him. "You want me to come with you?" Grace asked. "Please," Marcus said. "I do not think I can do this alone." They rode to the small cabin, and Marcus helped Grace down before knocking on the door. It opened to reveal a woman in her mid-20s, thin and careworn, with dark hair pulled back and a small girl peeking from behind her skirts. "Marcus!" The woman's face lit up with hope, then crumbled as she saw his expression. "No, oh God, no." "I am so sorry, Mary," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Samuel is gone. There was a fight and he was shot. I am so sorry." Mary collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing, and Grace stepped forward instinctively, catching her, supporting her weight. The little girl started crying too, frightened by her mother's reaction, and Grace found herself ushering them both inside, helping Mary to a chair while Marcus picked up the child. "Hush, little one," he murmured to the girl. "Hush now." The next hours were some of the hardest Grace had ever experienced. Mary's grief was raw and consuming, and Grace held her while she wept, while she raged, while she collapsed into numbness. Marcus told the story of what had happened, sparing some of the worst details but giving Mary the truth she deserved. He gave her the money he had brought, Samuel's share of the ranch proceeds. "The ranch is half yours now," Marcus said. "Samuel's half belongs to you and Emily. You have a home here as long as you want it and an income from the cattle sales." "How can I manage alone?" Mary whispered. "How can I raise Emily without him?" "You will not be alone," Grace heard herself saying. "Marcus and I will be right next door. We will help you with whatever you need." "I promise." Mary looked at Grace for the first time, really looked at her. "Who are you?" "My name is Grace. I am Marcus's wife. We were both injured on the trail and helped each other survive." Grace squeezed Mary's hands. "I know you do not know me, but I mean what I say. We are neighbors, and we take care of each other." Something in Grace's words seemed to reach Mary through her grief. She nodded slowly, exhausted. "Thank you." They stayed with Mary and Emily until evening, making sure they had food prepared and wood for the fire. Grace played with Emily, distracting her with simple games while Marcus and Mary talked more about Samuel, about the arrangements that would need to be made. When they finally returned to Marcus's cabin as twilight fell, both of them were emotionally wrought and physically exhausted. But there was also a sense of completion, of a duty fulfilled, however painful. "You were wonderful with her," Marcus said as they stood together looking at their cabin, with both of them. "Mary is strong," Grace said. "She will survive this." It will be hard, but she has her daughter and she has us. She will find her way through." Marcus pulled Grace close, careful of her still healing shoulder. "I love you," he said. "I know I have not said it plainly before, but I love you, Grace. I think I have loved you since the moment you patched my back while dealing with your own pain." "I love you too," Grace said, the words coming easy, coming true. "I think I have loved you since the wildflowers." They went inside their cabin together, and Grace looked around what would be her home. It was rough but solid, with a good fireplace, a sturdy table, a bed frame that needed a new mattress, and shelves waiting to be filled. It was empty of comfort but full of potential. "We will make this beautiful," Grace said with certainty. "We will make this a real home," and they did. Over the following weeks and months, as Grace's shoulder fully healed and Marcus's side knitted completely closed, they transformed the cabin into a home. Grace used fabric from Bannack to make curtains and cushions. Marcus built additional shelves and repaired the corral fence. They acquired chickens and a milk cow. Grace planted a kitchen garden, late in the season but with enough time for some crops. Grace also began handling the ranch books, and within a month, she had the accounts organized in a way that made sense, had identified expenses that could be reduced, had found a better buyer for their cattle. Marcus watched her work with admiration and gratitude. They helped Mary too, as promised. Marcus repaired her cabin's roof before winter. Grace taught Emily her letters and numbers, giving Mary time to work. They shared meals several times a week, and slowly, Mary began to heal, began to smile again, began to talk about the future without Samuel with something other than despair. As autumn painted the mountains gold and red, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes or fears prematurely, but when she missed a second time and began feeling queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny the signs. She told Marcus one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Marcus went very still. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor to confirm it." Marcus turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Grace admitted, "and thrilled, and anxious about whether I can be a good mother, and happy beyond words." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "How do you feel about it?" "The same," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of those things." He kissed her then, tender and deep. "We are going to be parents." "We are going to be parents," Grace repeated and started laughing and then crying, and Marcus held her through both. Winter came hard to the Montana mountains. Snow piled deep, and the temperatures dropped until the water in the bucket froze solid overnight. But the cabin was tight and warm, and they had laid in good supplies. Marcus tended the cattle, breaking ice on the water holes, distributing hay. Grace kept the home fires burning and worked on sewing small garments for the baby that would come in spring. Grace's pregnancy progressed well, despite occasional sickness and the limitations imposed by the weather. Mary, who had borne Emily, became a source of advice and support, and the two women grew close. Emily, now 4 years old, was excited about the coming baby and frequently visited to feel Grace's growing belly. "Will the baby play with me?" she asked one snowy afternoon. "Eventually," Grace promised. "Right now, the baby is very small and will need to grow quite a bit. But yes, someday soon you two will play together." Marcus was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly asking how Grace felt, insisting she rest, doing extra chores to spare her. Grace bore it with good humor, knowing it came from love and the lingering memory of how close they had both come to death. "Marcus," she said one evening, "I am pregnant, not made of glass. I can still gather eggs and cook supper." "I know," he said, "but humor me." I nearly lost you before I really found you. Let me take care of you now when I can." So Grace let him, because she understood. She knew he still sometimes woke at night from dreams of finding her dying on the trail, just as she sometimes woke from nightmares of the road agents. They were both healing from more than just physical wounds, and time was the best medicine for that. Spring came slowly, grudgingly to the mountains. Snow melted in fits and starts, streams swelled with runoff, and the valley greened. The cattle, thin from winter, began to regain their condition. And Grace's belly swelled large, her time drawing near. The baby came on a warm May morning in 1878, 9 months after Grace and Marcus had found each other on that desperate trail. Mary attended the birth, along with a midwife from Bannack who had come to stay for the event. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Grace thought she could not continue, could not bear another pain. But Marcus was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love, and Grace drew strength from him. When the baby finally emerged, wailing lustily, the midwife announced, "It is a boy, a fine, healthy boy." They named him Samuel Marcus Zimmerman, after the friend who had been lost and the father who had found a new life. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, with Marcus's dark hair and Grace's green eyes. Marcus cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he cradled the tiny body. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. Your mama and I are going to love you so much." Grace watched her husband with their son and felt her heart might burst with the fullness of it all. A year ago, she had been dying alone on a trail, certain her story was over. Now she was here, in a home she loved, with a man she adored, holding the child they had created together. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected that it still sometimes felt like a dream. Mary cried too when she learned the baby's name. "Thank you," she told them, holding little Emily's hand. "Thank you for remembering him, for honoring him this way." "He gave me my life, in a way," Marcus said. "He was my partner and friend for years. Our son should carry his name forward." The months after Samuel's birth were busy and joyful. Grace recovered well, and together she and Marcus navigated the exhausting early days of parenthood. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel during fussy nights, changing nappies without complaint, making silly faces to coax smiles. The ranch prospered too. With Grace's management of the finances and Marcus's skill with cattle, they expanded their herd and improved their breeding stock. They added another room to the cabin, then another, building their home to fit their growing life. Emily and young Samuel became constant companions as they grew, with Emily taking her role as older neighbor child very seriously, always watching out for him. Mary herself began to come back to life, the sharpest edges of her grief worn smooth by time and the support of her neighbors. 2 years after Samuel was born, Grace gave birth to a daughter, Caroline Rose Zimmerman, this time with an easier labor and less fear. Caroline had Marcus's smile and Grace's stubborn temperament. Marcus doted on her shamelessly, his little girl wrapped around his finger from her first breath. One evening, when Samuel was 4 and Caroline was 2, Grace and Marcus sat on the porch they had built onto the cabin, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. Grace leaned against Marcus's shoulder, his arm warm around her. "Do you ever think about that day on the trail?" she asked. "About how different everything could have been?" "All the time," Marcus admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and wonder if this is real, if you are real. It seems impossible that so much good could come from such terrible circumstances." "We made it good," Grace said. "We chose this, chose each other, chose to build instead of just survive." "Best choice I ever made," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. Finding you, half dead under that rock, was the luckiest day of my life. Finding you was mine, Grace replied. You gave me a home, Marcus. Not just this place, but a real home, a family, a purpose. Everything I thought I had lost. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, watching the light fade from the sky. Samuel was teaching Caroline to stack stones, his little face serious with concentration, while Caroline kept knocking them down and laughing. It was a perfect moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Over the years, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Marcus and Grace added more land, more cattle, hired hands to help with the work. They built a proper ranch house, larger and finer, though they kept the original cabin intact, a reminder of their beginnings. Mary eventually remarried to a kind rancher from the next valley over, and though she moved to his place, she and Emily remained close to Grace and Marcus. Emily grew into a lovely young woman who helped Grace with the younger children, for Grace and Marcus went on to have 2 more sons, Thomas and James, born 2 years apart. Grace became known throughout the region as a woman of sense and capability, someone ranchers consulted about accounts and organization. She started keeping books for several neighboring ranches, earning money that she saved and invested wisely. Marcus bragged about his wife's business acumen to anyone who would listen. Samuel grew into a strong, responsible young man, learning ranching from his father and academics from his mother. Caroline proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle the wildest colt with patience and intuition. Thomas loved books and spent hours reading everything he could find. James was the comedian of the family, always laughing, always finding joy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Grace back to Bannack, to the church where they had married. Reverend Taylor was long gone, moved to a larger congregation in Helena, but the church remained. They stood together in the empty building, holding hands, and renewed their vows to each other, speaking the same words they had spoken a decade before, but with so much more weight behind them now, so much history and love and life. I would do it all again, Marcus said afterward, as they walked through the town that had changed and grown. Every painful moment, every hard day, every wound and scar, if it meant finding you, building this life with you. So would I, Grace said. You are my home, Marcus Zimmerman. You always will be. They returned to the ranch, to their children, to the life they had built from blood and pain and stubborn hope. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and changing, by small joys and occasional sorrows. When Samuel turned 18, he took over much of the daily ranch operation, working alongside his father. He had inherited Marcus's skill with cattle and Grace's head for business, and the ranch prospered under their combined management. Caroline married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 21, a good man who loved her fierce independence and gentle heart. They settled on land adjacent to the Zimmerman ranch, staying close. Thomas went east to university, studying to be a teacher, sending long letters home about his studies and experiences. James stayed on the ranch, happy to work with horses and cattle, to live the life his parents had built. Mary's daughter Emily married as well, and had children of her own, grandchildren who played with Grace and Marcus's children, weaving the 2 families together in bonds deeper than blood. Grace and Marcus grew older together, their dark hair silvering, their faces creasing with laugh lines and years of sun and wind. Their bodies bore the scars of that long-ago trauma, reminders of how they had met, but those scars were just part of their story now, not the whole of it. On a summer evening when Grace was 52 and Marcus 54, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown and scattered, but Samuel and his wife lived in the old cabin with their 2 children, ensuring the ranch would continue. Caroline visited often with her family. Thomas had returned from the East and was teaching in Virginia City, happily sharing his love of learning with new generations. James was courting a girl from Helena and would likely marry soon. "We did well," Grace said softly, her hand in Marcus's. "With all of it. The ranch, the children, the life. We did better than well," Marcus said. "We did extraordinary. You were extraordinary, Grace. You are extraordinary." "So are you," Grace replied. "My Marcus, my love, my home." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars began to emerge. The same stars that had watched over them in that desperate camp by the creek so many years ago. Grace thought about the terrified, wounded woman she had been then, certain she was dying, and looked at the woman she had become. A wife, a mother, a rancher, a partner in every sense of the word. The journey between those 2 versions of herself had been built on love and work and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Grace said. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," Marcus said. "That we lost years we could have had together." "We had the years we were meant to have," Grace said, "and we used them well, every single one." As they grew older still, into their 60s and 70s, Grace and Marcus gradually turned over the ranch operation entirely to Samuel and his family, though they still offered advice and helped when needed. They spent their days in quieter pursuits. Grace tending her extensive garden, Marcus carving toys for his growing number of grandchildren, both of them reading and talking and simply being together. They traveled once, on Samuel's insistence, going back to St. Louis so Grace could see her childhood home again. It had changed beyond recognition, and Grace felt no sense of loss, only confirmation that her home, her real home, was in Montana with Marcus. They made another pilgrimage too, this one more important. They rode south to that creek where their camp had been, where 2 strangers had become we. The cottonwoods were still there, older and larger. The creek still sang over its stones. They stood together on that ground, older now, bearing the weight and joy of decades, and Marcus took Grace's hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saying yes to a broken cowboy in a desperate moment, for taking a chance on us." "Thank you for stopping," Grace replied, "for seeing me, for choosing to help instead of riding on. Thank you for everything that came after." They camped there one more night, 2 old people sleeping under the stars where they had first begun. In the morning, they rode home, satisfied that they had honored the place that had given them their beginning. Grace Zimmerman passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 76, her hand clasped in Marcus's. She simply did not wake one spring morning, slipping away so gently that Marcus did not realize she was gone until he tried to wake her with a kiss and found her skin cool. Marcus was devastated by her loss, but he lived on for another 3 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried pieces of Grace in their faces and spirits. He told their story often, about the wounded woman and the wounded cowboy who found each other on a trail and built a life together. When Marcus finally followed Grace into death at 77, sitting in his chair on the porch overlooking the valley he loved, his family buried him beside her in the small cemetery on the ranch. Their grandson, Samuel's eldest son, carved the headstones himself. Grace Ashford Zimmerman, 1852. 1928, beloved wife, mother. Grandmother, she chose love Marcus Zimmerman, 1849. 1927, beloved husband, father. Grandfather, he chose love below both names, on a shared stone that connected their graves. Two strangers, one camp, one life, forever love. The ranch continued under Samuel's children and grandchildren, the Zimmerman name becoming synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing throughout Montana. The story of Marcus and Grace was passed down through generations, told to children and grandchildren as an example of courage, love, and the power of choosing each other, even in desperate circumstances. The old cabin where they had first lived together was preserved, maintained by each generation, a landmark on the ranch and a reminder of humble beginnings. The porch where they had sat countless evenings remained, though reinforced and repaired over the years, still facing the mountains and the valley and the endless sky. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind was right, ranch hands swore they could hear laughter from the old cabin, could see two figures sitting on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. Whether it was truly spirits, or simply the power of a love story so strong it could not be entirely contained by something as small as death, no one could say. But everyone agreed that if any love deserved to echo through time, it was the love of Marcus and Grace Zimmerman, two wounded strangers who met on a trail, healed each other in a cowboy camp, and built a life that inspired generations. They had taken the worst moments of their lives and transformed them into something beautiful, something lasting, something true. Their story began with blood and pain and near death, but it ended with love and family and home. And really, as their descendants would say, raising glasses in toast on anniversaries and celebrations, that was the greatest testament to the human spirit, that from such desperate beginnings could come such extraordinary joy. Marcus and Grace had proven that wounds could heal, that strangers could become everything, that a cowboy camp by a creek could be the birthplace of forever. They had shown that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made daily, made in hardship and in joy, made until death and perhaps beyond. And so their love story lived on, told and retold, a permanent part of the land they had loved, the family they had built, the legacy they had left. Two people who should have died alone instead lived together, loved together, and created something that would outlast them both. That was their gift to the world, proof that even in the darkest moments there is hope. That even when wounded and lost, you might find exactly what you need. That love can heal what nothing else can touch. That two people, choosing each other, can change everything. In the end, Grace and Marcus's story was simple. They found each other when they most needed finding. They healed each other when healing seemed impossible. And they loved each other with a depth and devotion that transformed two shattered lives into one beautiful whole. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in pain and survival, and perfected through decades of choosing each other, every single day forever.